Welcome back, all our 40k fanatics out there. I'm DJ here with Tim's Nation to bring you my list that will be taking on Lane in our next battle report. I have been recently starting to get the competitive itch again. I knew that when my twins were born, I was not going to have the time to do any long travel in GT. And then we have the winter, and me, I'm not a big fan of traveling in the winter unless it involves an airplane, and the end of the journey involves a beach, probably in Florida. So, given all those factors, I've been able to kind of mess around with some different things, theory hammer some stuff, run some crazy builds on the channel. Now it's time to put all those crazy builds to the test, start putting together some of the data that I've learned, specifically a lot of it with Necrons, and see what we can come up with, see what we can create here, and what direction to go in ultimately. Right now, I feel like Grey Knights and Necrons are the two factions that I'd feel most comfortable with. And for this video, we're talking about Necrons. So some of the builds I have are they've worked well, and I'm curious on how much damage and board control they can keep going into some of the heavier hits of the meta. Some other lists I've tooled around new concepts, whether it was Hypercrypt, Canoptic Court, and Awakened Dynasty, that have the ability to score and control the scoreboard. Today, we're doing neither one of those. We are going so far into the damage column, we are borderlining risk of not having enough to score secondaries on. We do have some stuff in there, but we mostly are just going to hit it till it stops moving. That's the motto of this list. We are running the Starshatter Arsenal. In the Starshatter Arsenal we ran once before and did quite well with it. We're able to get some sneaky tricks in there, and I believe pull out the win with that one with just some super secret tech, being able to move through walls and such. But we were left with very little at the end. Some of it I put into destroyers, squatted them that got kind of beat up. The Tomb Blades, which just didn't do too much for me. Maybe that was just me, but it didn't function. Again, I did them kind of different, and I may have used them a little too recklessly, but you know, that's just sometimes how it goes. That was the first time in a while I've used them, and I have not been a big fan of them in other armies. I know that a lot of people like them and get a great success out of them, and I can see it. I mean, they have the stat for it. They don't flow with me well. However, I've also seen a lot of talk about the Silent King in Starshatter and just being a beast. And I think the one thing that really sold me was a meme that had the Silent King's face on the Hulk while Iron Man was in the Hulkbuster iron suit and just beating him down, and he just turns around and looks at him and spits out a tooth. And so it compels to me to see how stupidly resilient this guy really can be. Maybe it'll change my opinion. I don't particularly like running the bigger guys. I like to invest that points more into the army as a whole. But this is interesting with Starshatter and him. I mean, it's really interesting. The guy is a vehicle. The guy is not Titanic. He can use the strats to move through walls. We can reduce damage, etc., etc., etc. So he's in a very strange column. Kind of that whole type of aspect with him and Hypercrypt. It's like you can spend a command point and land him very efficiently, very close. So he, not using the king to buff an entire army, but yet using the king as a bomb, literally. So it's interesting with him. Not to mention the fact that also in this detachment, we have access to an enhancement that's one of his buffs, reroll ones to hit and wound. That means that he can go over onto other things, such as his ignore modifiers buff. It's very interesting. I cannot say, like I talked about a little bit in some of my videos where I said I like him. I can understand why people would run him. I'm just not. It's not my cup of tea. I have to put it on the table and see if it's not my cup of tea. Because there's a lot of data out there, a lot of information on how he runs in this detachment that is really hard to ignore. All right, so I said heavy damage. Let's go over and take a look at the list, and then we'll talk about this more in this craziness, because I need to Got to give you guys the full picture of what I'm thinking about with this. All right, there it is. My 2,000 point on the money Starshatter Necrons detachments. And if you notice, and some of you guys know in previous videos how much I hate flying bases, notice I have to deal with quite a few of them in this one because of things like the Doomsday Arcs and the Catacomb Command Barge. Ugh. So let's just jump right into it and start right with the meat and potatoes that we were just talking about, and that is the Silent King. So the Silent King, basically, to bring him into an entire nutshell, he is 24-inch range with his guns. He's got 2 big shots that are the flat 6 damage coming off the rocks, and then he's got 12 shots with his artillery staff thingy. In combat, he's decent. He's not really going to punch up well, but when you get him into Marines and even like 3 wound stuff and higher toughness than normal, he's able to chew through. Now, being that the fact that this detachment, which I failed to mention, gives us +1 to hit when attacking a unit on an objective marker, as well as gives all vehicle and mounted units assault on their weapons, on their guns. He is not Titanic, so he can therefore move through a wall with the strat, and he could advance and shoot his guns, meaning that he has a lot more speed in that aspect because he doesn't have to go around than he has in other detachments. Not to mention, he's also backed by a lot of other things in the army that can do the same thing, such as advance and still shoot. So there's a lot of threat presence that can be brought around him, and each of those threats are very, very close to the same stats, meaning that the same weapons are going to be required to hit them. Now, out of this detachment, as I mentioned, I do have the enhancement for reroll, hit, and wound roll of 1, 6-inch aura. This means that he can go over to the ignore modifiers. Armor of Contempt, minuses to hit, and stuff like that are things that we can just completely ignore with him, or at the same time, we can spread out the reroll 1s to hit and wound buff. Typically in the past, one of the things that I didn't like with the Silent King was how everything felt like it had to funnel around him. Once you take him, because you really need to get the value out of that 400 points. By having this enhancement as well, now we can spread the field out more and cover better terrain to get out from behind to shoot, especially since all of our guns are all going to be at least a minimal of 8-inch move with the ability to advance and still shoot. So the Silent King, it's very interesting. Originally I was skeptical. I didn't think he would fit my playstyle and that I would like him very much. The more I see, the more I think about it. I could be wrong, so let's give him a try and see how he rolls out. Now, let's go over and just talk about the Doomsday Arcs. I know I say that was with a tinge of like, ugh, but it's not really that. I'm thinking about this on the opposite aspect of what my opponent is going to have to deal with, and how it's so silly. It's so much damage. It's insane. Doomsday Arcs are very powerful with their main gun, very powerful with the Gauze Flare arrays. These guys can move block. They're super long, so getting them into a position to move block a lane is huge. I have the -1 to damage characteristic enhancement in this army, which will come up later. This can be used on them. It can be used on the king, but it can be used on them too, and just put a wall in front of someone with a 4-up invulnerable save, Gauze Flare array to shoot in light infantry so it doesn't get too bogged down, and the Doomsday Cannon, which can just pummel anything. Now, per se, this guy is stuck in combat. He can still shoot out. And the gun has heavy. So the -1 for shooting for big guns never tire kind of ignores, because he just sits still and shoots. On top of it, we do have the enhancement in this army to fall back and shoot if that's needed. These guys can wall for days. And then floating around by my Catacomb Command Barge or the Silent King to get reroll 1s to hit and then +1 on things, it basically turns into 2 extra big, bulky rocks and guns that float around the king. Because you can go after the king. You can hit the king pretty hard and take him out. But if you hit it, usually most of the time, the kings will still survive with some wounds remaining. And that means these Doomsday Arcs are still going to shoot. Switch over to reroll ones to hit and wound. Don't go pushing with the king. And now you're in position for the Doomsday Arcs to just blast something. Potentially even get into that rare circumstance where they can sit still and take full advantage of being stationary with devastating wounds and +1 to hit. A while ago, I ran 2 Annihilation Barges back in 9th edition with how we did it, and I loved how the Annihilation Barges were basically an extension of the king and just kind of floated around him and just shot and did damage off him. These guys are going to be very similar. And with how durable they are, with the stratagem access that we have to make them even more durable, once my opponent really starts dedicating into a target, it's going to be really hard to get through. Next up, continuing on with damage, we have 3-man Locust Heavies with Gauze Destructors and 3 Locust Heavy with the Exterminator. 9 Locust Heavy Destroyers. Copying off Lane, I'm going big. So these guys, I think, have been very underappreciated because they're only 1 shot apiece on the Gauze Destructor. There is so many buffs and modifications and everything that these guys get hit with on they're so reliable at what they shoot at. And honestly, I'm always able to find a target. Centurions, high toughness 3-wound models, big vehicles. These guys can hit just about everything. They also can free up the Doomsday Arcs from shooting at large vehicle targets to these guys shooting at large vehicle targets, and the Doomsday Arc being able to blast a 10-man squad that just got out of said large vehicle target. They're very durable, 4 wounds apiece. They are mounted so they can get Resurrection Orbed off of my Catacomb Command Barge. And yeah, they're very tough. Now, the Exterminators, 6 shots, rapid fire, sustained. It basically turns into 36 shots coming off the squad. Strength 6, AP 1, 1 damage. Reroll 1s into infantry to wound. The Gauze Destructors reroll 1s into monsters and vehicles. I believe monsters as well, to wound. The Gauze Destructors have lethal, so those 6s are pushing right through. These guys the Exterminators have sustained, so they're getting extra hits there. There's so much reliability with these guys and their rules that I think they get underappreciated. Now, I do have 1 Locust Lord that I'll be taking. He'll probably go with the Exterminators to be able to give them 5-up crits, play these guys a little more on the front line. That Locust Lord is the one, and we'll go over to him, the Locust Lord. He gives a unit 5-up crits. He has a Resurrection Orb for his unit. He's not too shabby in combat, especially with the +1 to hit going into things on objective markers. That is helpful. He also just hits harder himself because I think he has rerolls just by himself when he fights. And being able to give the 5-up sustain to the Exterminators means we're really going to be putting out a lot of shots to go into an infantry target. Typically, I run Spiders with this role. It's very difficult to ignore how much more I can get with the shots from the Exterminators. The Locust Lord is the one with the enhancement for -1 to damage, and this affects vehicle or mounted units. So he can target a squad, his own squad for that matter, and have -1 damage on these 4-wound guys. That's going to make them super resilient late into the game and make them very hard to eliminate. So I'm putting a lot of eggs in the damage basket. Now, since we started with characters, we're going to continue on. We do have a Psychomancer. You know, I love this guy as a solo to be able to battle shock things. Super cool, super neat. He is going to be the one that's running around with the enhancement to fall back and shoot. It's only 10 points. It's a very good enhancement it's a very handy enhancement when it comes in handy. But the other enhancements that I need, I put a little more necessity behind. So this guy will be able to do things like if someone makes in the backfield and charges my Locust Heavies or wherever they may be, this guy can go, okay, you fell back, now you can still shoot, which is where they're going to be the strongest. It could be something I get him in position with the Doomsday Arc, and it's nice because that actual enhancement triggers during the movement phase, so I can move the unit closer to him and then hit them with it so that they can still shoot during the shooting phase. Otherwise, he does his shenanigans to battle shock things, which I love, and he can go around and try and score me some secondary points. Last in the characters, Catacomb Command Barge. Catacomb Command Barge in this detachment is one of the few units that can take the enhancement for +1, reroll ones to hit and reroll ones to wound. The other unit being the Overlord. I consider the Overlord, and that's going to be a talk for another video. There is some interesting things I like with an Overlord and some Immortals because you still get the +1 to hit when going at units on objective markers. That is a army-wide ability that's not just mounted in vehicles. Plus, the unit can be targeted with the counter move strat when you get hit for 0 because of the Overlord. So there's a lot I have in there. However, that squad starts getting into 200 plus points. Catacomb Command Barge comes in at 120 points. He brings a Resurrection Orb that can target mounted or infantry, which the Locust Heavy happen to be mounted, so that's additional resurrection. He can smack in combat, which combat is something I'm kind of lacking, so him being able to do some cleanup damage is pretty good. Shooting, he's got a gun. He's got a gun that actually impacts a single gauze cannon. And as I said, he has the enhancement to go reroll ones to hit and reroll ones to wound within 6 inches. And he's a wider hull, so that's a little bit better radius for that ability. He allows me to play the king forward, so he can kind of play back and play by the Locust Heavies and give them reroll ones, but also be able to give the Doomsday Arcs at 2 during the early points of the game. That being said, he's also very defensive, high toughness, high wounds, and -1 to wound him inherently with weapons that are higher than his toughness. So that's pretty good too. Otherwise, he might be a dude to complete some actions with the Locust Heavies so that the Locust Heavies can continue to do their job. And give an aura effect of +1 OC. That's another big thing. That's a big, big factor to be able to boost my OC value for things like the Locust Heavies and continuously control an objective just because he makes them OC3. So that might be a big factor in some moments in games. Next up, we have 2 Canoptic Tomb Spiders. Because what would a Necron list of mine be without spiders? So the spiders, they give a 6 up Feel No Pain to vehicles. They give a 5 up Feel No Pain to devastating immortal wounds. Depending on the matchup, these guys might need to use that aura a lot more than they are initially planned with these guys. More or less, I expect them to move with the front of the army, move with the Doomsday Arcs, move with the Silent King, and just be something that can really, really smack once the Silent King gets into combat and we start dealing with that aspect. These guys, near the king, if we're doing the reroll ones to hit and wound, you have their particle beamers, 4d6 shots coming off that. If they're shooting at a unit on an objective marker, their vehicles, so +1 to hit, rerolling ones, strength 6, so probably wounding on 3s, rerolling ones with dev wounds, and they have blast. Then they charge, then 5 attacks apiece, +1 to hit, rerolling ones, smacking stuff, just thunder hammer damage, and just chewing through so much for a cheap, cheap cost. On top of giving a 6 up Feel No Pain to things like the Silent King. These guys are also kind of one of the units that's durable, that can protect and can do work and complete secondaries while my force is moving forward. They are more of a gunboat in some aspects. That's why I have someone else to do those actions as well. But again, these guys are someone to do the action, so things like the Doomsday Arc and the Silent King that may have helped push into an area, I can do those actions there when I draw those cards. Next up, also helping to do actions, is a Canoptic Reanimator. So this guy I've been liking more and more. He is really, really durable with that 4-up Feel No Pain. He is not, the D plus D3 on reanimation is good. But realistically with him, I look at him and I look at how much he costs, how many models he brings back with that D3. And if he can bring back 75 points worth of models over the course of the game, then that's fine. Like, it doesn't need to be every single turn. Things like my Locust Heavies. If a squad gets smacked and knocked down to one guy, the Resurrection Orb and the Reanimator combo together very, very well. When the Reanimator says whenever a reanimation is triggered, reanimate additional D3. So by taking a single Locust and moving it towards the Reanimator, we can pop that Resurrection Orb, which pops, I believe, at the end of any phase. And we pop it at the end of the movement phase. And looking at it right now, the end of any phase. Yeah. So you pop it at the end of the movement phase, D6 reanimate, then the Reanimator triggers for an additional D3. Right there might be your near 50, a little over 50 points just in that model that he might assist in bringing back. On top of the fact that the Silent King gets beat up, moves over by him, we start to heal and just have him kind of tag along with the Silent King to kind of give him an additional D3 wounds when he's reanimating. That could be a breaking point where the Silent King just doesn't get destroyed. Not expecting it to be that crazy. A lot of it is going to be the threat capability of the fact that if you let this guy go, he's going to be able to heal a lot of stuff and null and void some damage. Otherwise, you got a dude with a 4-up Feel No Pain completing actions. That's what I'm looking at. He can advance and still shoot his gun. Okay, cool. But the biggest thing is he is a 4-up Feel No Pain that can stay behind a wall and complete an action. And if you hit him, he is very hard to take down. You actually have to dedicate real guns, real weapons to bring him down. Otherwise, he's just going to walk away. He's only 6 wounds, but that 4-up Feel No Pain is really, really nothing to not look into, especially with him. Things like -1 to wound against it for him. Granted, we're going to be using that probably on higher value targets, but if he gets ignored till late in the game and you go -1 to wound on him, he could end up just standing in the middle of the field and just go, okay, I'm going to live forever now. So, yeah, Canoptic Reanimator making its debut in Starshatter. I've had it on the channel before, but it's its debut for this detachment. All right, moving on. Moving on to the last of it, we have 2 3-man squads of Ophidian Destroyers. I need stuff to play secondaries. Could have gone with Tomb Blades. Tomb Blades go on the front line. Tomb Blades get destroyed. I like the Ophidians. Pick them up, drop them down, and I can use them to kind of zone out some areas to try to protect me from things that could deep strike in on first turn and hit me way harder than I want to be hit on the first turn and do damage to some of my big weapons. So you might notice kind of a difference in me with this list and how I explained it and how long I've taken to explain it for that competitive nature where it's like, this is something I put a lot of deep thought into. I'm not saying it's going to be the final draft. This is the first draft. This is the rough draft. And there are a lot of things to take in consideration. Number 1, is the Reanimator a dead pick? Should I have not gone with that way? Should I just go with an additional spider? That's one thing that I want to test and see. Am I too heavy in the Locust Heavy Destroyers? Should I not bother with them? One thing that I was considering was taking all the points that I put in the Locust Heavy Destroyers and put it into stuff for the secondary game and just basing my damage output behind the Silent King and the 2 Doomsday Arcs and whatever, maybe the squad of spiders because they provide a buff as well. Taking more spiders as the secondary scoring pieces. I could take 2 by dropping 2 squads of Locust Heavies. I can take 2 additional squads of spiders, drop the other Locust Heavy and the Locust Lord, and go a different direction with that, by putting more stuff in towards that secondary game. Dropping the Reanimator, 75 points there, put stuff into infantry, or drop the spiders out entirely and maybe go a completely different route with it of some infantry and stuff like that, and maybe make a resilient little core around Xeris and some Immortals and see what type of build I can get out of that, and then still having the Silent King and 2 Doomsday Arcs. So there's a lot of things to consider with this detachment. A lot of the strats are very strong, but with only having access to like 1 CP, 2 per turn, it may turn into a sense of me having to reduce down to what units are really going to get those stratagems, and then play off other things that I can run that have better state-based abilities, things like Xeris with Immortals, as opposed to, and don't need as much stratagem support. With that being said, there's still the counter move, which can be used. Overlords do 0 CP strats, which is still very good. I do love Immortals charging onto objectives and re-rolling wounds with an Overlord with a dev weapon. That's still some powerful stuff. And I can spread out and cover the board more to not get deep struck on. So that's something I've considered. But the opposite to what we're running today is I'm just going to hit everything as hard as I can. Anything that you put out there that has the capability of threatening me, you may be able to get the jump. You may be able to take out a Doomsday Arc or take out the rocks of the Silent King and do stuff like that. But it doesn't cripple me. Losing 1 Doomsday Arc doesn't cripple me because the Silent King has guns he can fire as well. Losing the King's firepower in the rocks and having him be damaged doesn't completely tank the game. Now the Silent King goes into a defensive mode where we are buffing the Doomsday Arcs, that we get into a position that to move block you from getting over to the King while the King's healing back up. And he may never get the rocks back, but he'll get himself into a better position where he still has more resilience to go with it. Move that Reanimator up there and start just getting him moving to a better health range. So that's kind of thing. That's going to be a big part of it too, is going to be how my opponent decides to hit me. It's going to be almost impossible for me to protect my entire army. So that's a big part of the redundancy, is making sure I have these things to go into later points of the game, but still having things that are very resilient and very defensive. If you don't get a clear line of sight at my Locust Heavies and they're behind a wall, you're going to hurt them. You could drop them all the way down to 1 model, but again, with a Resurrection Orb off the command barge, and if you hit the unit that's got the Locust Lord with it, I mean, I have 2d6 reanimation to possibly trigger right there at the end of a phase. And if you want to say you can't use the Catacomb and the Resurrection Orb because they share the same name in the same phase, I don't know if that's true or not, and I have to look that up, but it's still not the end of the world of it. I use one at the end of the shooting phase, I can use one at the end of the fight phase, or the charge phase, for that matter, before damage is even done. So we can get these guys back up to a very strong, very, very strong point. So this detachment, having the rerolls it does, really increases the reliability behind these weapons. A lot of my weapons have just straight flat damage, so I don't have to play games with that. And I do have rerolls in multiple phases. So as long as we can continuously draw a line of sight to targets and constantly be able to start shooting across the field, I really do feel I have the weapons that I can just bowl my opponent over and then score secondary and primary into the late game, and start to just do that. Big weakness, I don't have a lot of coverage from Deep Strike that they can hit and start to remove a piece or pieces of my firing base before I want them to. So that's kind of where the balance is coming in and seeing how this works out. Ophidians will do a good job of zoning out things like if I have to in those scenarios, Reanimator and Psychomancer can do that as well. Help me just protect and create a bubble in the backfield. And the Locust Heavies are not really trying to go up very far across the field, so they can also keep trying to keep the game in front of me. And that's where I really want to do, is just keep the game in front of me. All right, let's draw it to a close there. That's what we're running. Going to go do a little bit of painting, seeing if I can't. I got the Doomsday Arc primed up, and I got those all ready to go. We'll see if we can't get some of those ready for this game. All right, guys. As always, thanks for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.